Eric Murphy sat frozen on the edge of the couch, his jacket draped across his lap like a shield he couldn't quite bring himself to raise. The fabric felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the gravity of what had just happened between them. Across the small living room, Ronald Rogers stood with his back turned, one hand braced against the window frame as he stared out into the rain-soaked street below. The silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither was ready to cross, filled with the echo of words that couldn't be taken back and the electric memory of lips that had found each other in the darkness just moments before. "I should go," Eric whispered, but his body betrayed him, remaining perfectly still except for his fingers that traced the worn denim of his jacket with trembling precision. Ronald's shoulders tensed at the sound of his voice, and Eric watched the way his breath fogged the glass, watched the way his free hand clenched and unclenched at his sweat. When Ronald asked, his voice barely audible over the rain pattering against the window. The question hung in the air like smoke, curling around Eric's chest and making it hard to breathe. Because the truth was that every fiber of his being was screaming at him to stay, to cross that impossible distance and touch Ronald's shoulder, to turn him around and see if the same desperate confusion was written across his features. But Eric had spent so long being careful, so long pretending that the ache in his chest when Ronald smiled was nothing more than friendship, that the thought of admitting the truth felt like stepping off a cliff into freefall. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story is about to take you on an emotional journey you won't forget. But to understand how they had arrived at this moment, suspended between everything they had been and everything they might become, you would have to go back to the beginning. You would have to go back to 3 months earlier when Eric Murphy was just a guy picking up his jacket from his best friend's apartment, completely unaware that he was about to discover something about himself that would change everything. It had been a Tuesday evening in late September when Eric first realized he was in trouble, real trouble. The kind that started in your chest and spread through your entire body like wildfire, leaving you breathless and confused and wondering how you could have been so blind to your own heart. He had been sitting at Ronald's kitchen table, watching his best friend of 4 years pace back and forth across the small apartment, gesticulating wildly as he talked about his latest relationship disaster. Ronald was saying, running his hands through his dark hair in that way that made Eric's stomach do strange things he refused to acknowledge. "Sarah seemed perfect on paper. She's smart, she's funny, she's beautiful. We have everything in common. But when I'm with her, it's like I'm playing a role in someone else's life. Does that make sense?" Eric nodded even though his throat felt tight. "Maybe you just haven't found the right person yet." Ronald stopped pacing and looked at him with those warm brown eyes that had been haunting Eric's dreams lately, though he would never admit it out loud. The vulnerability in Ronald's voice made Eric's chest ache with the familiar pain of wanting to comfort him, wanting to pull him close and tell him that he was perfect exactly as he was. But Eric had learned to swallow those impulses, had trained himself to be the supportive friend who listened without judgment and offered advice without agenda. Quote 7, Eric asked quietly. Ronald sat down across from him at the small wooden table, close enough that Eric could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "8. He trailed off, his gaze dropping to his hands. "Machonum, quote. The words hit Eric like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and making the room tilt on its axis. For a moment, he thought he might have misheard, might have projected his own desperate longing onto Ronald's innocent confession. But the way Ronald was looking at him now with a mixture of confusion and something that looked dangerously like hope, told him that he had heard correctly. "Ronald," Eric began, but his friend held up a hand. "I know how that sounds. I know it's crazy. But lately I can't stop thinking about it. About us. About whether there's something here that I've been too scared or too stupid to see." Eric felt like he was drowning, like the careful walls he had built around his feelings were crumbling with every word that fell from Ronald's lips. Because this was everything he had wanted to hear and everything he was terrified of confronting. The truth was that Eric had been in love with Ronald Rogers for 2 years and 4 months, had been counting the days since that moment when he realized that what he felt for his best friend was far more than friendship. It had happened on a random Thursday evening when Ronald had fallen asleep on Eric's couch during a movie, his head pillowed on Eric's shoulder, and his breathing soft and even against Eric's neck. Eric had sat there for hours, afraid to move and break the spell, memorizing the weight of Ronald's body against his and the way his hair smelled like cedar and rain. When Ronald had finally stirred and pulled away with a sleepy apology, Eric had felt the loss like a physical ache, and that's when he knew he was completely and utterly lost. Since then, every interaction had been a careful dance of maintaining normalcy while his heart hammered against his ribs. Every casual touch, every shared laugh, every late-night conversation had been both a gift and a torture, feeding the hope he tried so hard to suppress while reminding him of everything he couldn't have. Quote the 13, Eric admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Ronald leaned forward, his eyes searching Eric's face with an intensity that made Eric feel exposed and vulnerable. Say what you're thinking. Please. I feel like I'm going crazy here. Like I'm seeing things that aren't there or missing things that are right in front of me. Eric's hands were trembling where they rested on the table, and he clasped them together to hide the tremor. The question hung between them like a live wire, crackling with possibility and danger. Ronald's breath caught, and Eric watched his pupils dilate slightly, watched the way his tongue darted out to wet his lips in a gesture that Eric had noticed 100 times before but never allowed himself to interpret. Are you saying that you... Ronald started but couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Can, Eric said, surprised by his own boldness. What should 18, Ronald's eyes widened, and for a moment Eric thought he had gone too far, had finally crossed the line that would ruin everything between them. But then Ronald was reaching across the table, his fingers brushing against Eric's with a touch so gentle it felt like a question. Ronald asked quietly, "Quote 20 now," Eric admitted without hesitation, because there was no point in lying anymore. Quote 21. Ronald's fingers tightened around his, and Eric could see tears gathering in his eyes. I thought I was losing my mind. I kept telling myself it was just because we're close friends, that it was normal to feel disconnected to someone. But then I would catch myself staring at your mouth when you talked, or wanting to touch you for no reason, or feeling jealous when you went on dates with other people. You were jealous? Eric asked, hardly daring to believe it. Insanely jealous. And I couldn't understand why, because I'm supposed to be straight. I've always dated women. I've never questioned my sexuality before. But being with you feels more natural than any relationship I've ever had. Eric felt like his heart was going to beat right out of his chest. So what does that mean? For us? Ronald was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns across Eric's knuckles in a gesture that sent electricity shooting up Eric's arm. I think it means I've been lying to myself about who I am and what I want. I think it means that maybe sexuality isn't as fixed as I thought it was. And I think it means that I'm falling in love with my best friend, and I don't know what to do about it. The confession hit Eric like a tidal wave, washing away months of careful control and leaving him gasping and raw and more alive than he had felt in years. Ronald, he breathed, and suddenly the distance between them felt unbearable. Can I ask you something? Ronald said, his voice soft and uncertain. Eric nodded, not trusting his voice. What would happen if I kissed you right now? The question sent a shock of heat through Eric's entire body, pooling low in his stomach and making his hands shake where Ronald was still holding them. Quote 30. Eric said carefully, quote 30. Ronald stood up slowly, still holding Eric's hand, and Eric rose to meet him. They stood there for a moment, facing each other across the small kitchen, the air between them charged with 2 years of suppressed longing and the terrifying possibility of everything changing. I'm scared, Ronald whispered. Me too, Eric admitted, but I'm more scared of pretending this doesn't exist. Ronald stepped closer, close enough that Eric could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. I know. What if it ruins everything between us? Eric reached up with his free hand and cupped at Ronald's cheek, marveling at the softness of his skin and the way Ronald leaned into the touch, like he had been starving for it. Quote 38, Ronald's eyes fluttered closed at the contact, and Eric could see the internal war playing out across his features. When he opened his eyes again, they were dark with something that looked like determination mixed with desire. Eric, he said, and Eric's name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Quote 40. Quote 40, and Eric's answer was to close the remaining distance between them, to slide his hand from Ronald's cheek to the back of his neck and pull him down until their foreheads were touching and they were breathing the same air. He whispered against Ronald's lips. The first touch of their mouths was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Eric sighed against Ronald's lips and felt him smile in response, something shifted between them. Ronald's free hand came up to frame Eric's face, his thumb brushing across his cheekbone as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that spoke of months of suppressed desire finally given permission to exist. Eric had kissed people before, had thought he understood what desire felt like, but nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for the way Ronald's mouth moved against his with a desperation that matched his own, or the way his body seemed to come alive under Ronald's touch, every nerve ending singing with electricity. This was what he had been searching for in every failed relationship, this feeling of coming home, of finding the missing piece of himself in another person's arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronald rested his forehead against Eric's and laughed shakily. Quote 43, quote 44, Eric agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Not fine," quote and Ronald trailed off, searching for words. Quote down, Eric finished. Quote man, Ronald nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Quote down, they stood there holding each other, neither wanting to break the spell that had settled over them. But eventually reality began to creep back in, bringing with it all the complications and questions that their kiss had created. Quote 15, Eric asked quietly. Ronald's arms tightened around him. "I don't know. This is all new territory for me. I've never felt this way about a man before. I've never questioned my sexuality like this." "We don't have to figure it all out tonight," Eric said, though part of him wanted to demand answers, wanted to know exactly where they stood and what this meant for their future. "We can take it slow. We can figure it out together." "What if I hurt you?" Ronald asked, and the vulnerability in his voice made Eric's chest ache. Quote 55. Eric pulled back enough to look into Ronald's eyes to see the fear and uncertainty written there alongside the lingering heat from their kiss. "What if you're not confused? What if this is exactly what you need? What we both need? What if we're both exactly where we're supposed to be?" Ronald searched his face for a long moment, and Eric could see him weighing the possibilities, calculating the risks. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll figure it out together, but I need you to be patient with me. This is all so new, and I'm terrified of messing it up." "I've waited 2 years and 4 months, Eric said with a small smile. "I think I can be patient a little longer." Ronald laughed, the sound bright and relieved in the quiet kitchen. "God, I can't believe I was so blind. Looking back now, all the signs were there. The way I felt when you smiled at me, the way I always wanted to be near you, the way no relationship felt complete because they weren't you." "I know the feeling," Eric said softly. "I kept telling myself it was just friendship, that what I felt for you was normal. But normal friends don't lie awake at night thinking about kissing their best friend. Normal friends don't feel like their heart is being ripped out every time that friend dates someone else." "You really felt that way?" Ronald asked, wonder coloring his voice. "Every single time. I became an expert at pretending to be happy for you while dying inside." Ronald's expression grew pain. "Datash to quote son," Eric said, reaching up to smooth the worry lines from Ronald's forehead. "How could you know when I was working so hard to hide it? But I should have seen it. I should have recognized what I was feeling sooner." Eric shook his head. "You weren't ready to see it. Sometimes we need time to understand ourselves, to grow into who we're meant to be. Maybe this is exactly the right time for both of us." Ronald caught Eric's hand where it rested against his face and pressed a kiss to his palm, the gesture so tender that it made Eric's breath catch. "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the same time I fell in love with you," Eric admitted without thinking, then froze as he realized what he had said. Ronald's eyes widened, and for a moment Eric thought he had ruined everything, had moved too fast and scared him away. But then Ronald was smiling, bright and beautiful and full of something that looked like Jonah Kotan, he asked softly. Eric felt his cheeks burn, but he nodded. Quote, Arthur, quotes Horace, Ronald said, his thumb tracing the line of Eric's jaw. Because I've been in love with you too, and I was too stupid to realize it. The words hit Eric like a physical blow, stealing in his breath and making his knees weak. You love me? I think I have for a long time. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it before. I didn't understand that love could feel like this, like coming home and going on an adventure at the same time. Eric felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening between them. After so many months of hopeless longing, of convincing himself that his feelings would never be returned, the reality of Ronald's confession felt almost too good to be true. Quote Sam, he whispered. Quote Sahib, Ronald said, leaning down to press a soft kiss to Eric's lips. Because I'm not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out together, and we're going to do it right. Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. They took things slowly, carefully, learning each other in ways they had never allowed themselves to before. They had long conversations about sexuality and identity, about what it meant for Ronald to discover this new part of himself, and what it meant for Eric to finally have his feelings reciprocated. There were moments of uncertainty, times when Ronald would panic about what his family would think or worry that he was just going through a phase. But Eric was patient, offering reassurance without pressure, letting Ronald set the pace while making it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. They went on their first official date 3 weeks after that night in the kitchen, a simple dinner at a quiet restaurant where they could talk without interruption. Eric had been nervous, worried that the transition from friends to something more would feel awkward or forced. But sitting across from Ronald, watching the candlelight flicker across his features as he talked about his day, felt as natural as breathing. Quote Jackson 81. Ronald admitted over dessert, his fingers intertwined with Eric's on the table between them. But it doesn't. It feels like the most normal thing in the world. Maybe because it is normal, Eric suggested. Maybe this is just who we are, who we've always been. We just needed time to figure it out. Ronald nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how I never really felt like myself in my relationships with women. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was broken somehow. But with you, I feel like I can finally breathe. What changed your mind? About us, I mean. What made you finally see it? Ronald was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I think it was that night when I was telling you about Sarah, and I said I wanted to feel with someone the way I felt with you. As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized how they sounded. And instead of taking them back or explaining them away, I found myself thinking, what if? What if the reason no relationship has ever felt right is because I've been looking in the wrong place? What if what I've been searching for has been right in front of me this whole time? And what did you decide? That I was tired of being afraid of the answer. Eric squeezed his hand. I'm glad you were brave enough to ask the question. I'm glad you were brave enough to answer it honestly. I know it couldn't have been easy, hiding how you felt for so long. Eric shrugged. It was worth it. All of it. The waiting, the uncertainty, the fear. It was all worth it to end up here with you. Ronald lifted their joined hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to Eric's knuckles. Babto, he said simply, and Eric felt his heart skip a beat at the words he had waited so long to hear. Quote 94. Eric replied, marveling at how easy it was to say now, how right it felt to finally speak the truth that had been living in his chest for so long. They walked home hand in hand through the quiet streets, stopping occasionally to steal kisses under streetlights like teenagers with their first love. And maybe that's what they were, Eric thought. Maybe this was their first real love, the kind that changed everything and made you understand why nothing else had ever worked out. When they reached Ronald's apartment, they stood on the doorstep for a moment, neither wanting the evening to end. Ronald asked, his voice soft and hopeful. Eric felt his pulse quicken at the invitation, at the promise it held. Eric followed him up the stairs to the small apartment that had become so familiar over the years of their friendship. But tonight it felt different, charged with new possibility and the weight of everything that had changed between them. Ronald turned to face him as soon as the door closed behind them, reaching for him with a hunger that spoke of weeks of careful restraint finally being released. Their second kiss was deeper than their first, more urgent, full of the desperate need to make up for lost time. Code 98, Ronald murmured against Eric's lips, his hands tangling in Eric's hair. Quote 99, Eric asked, needing to know, needing to understand the timeline of Ronald's feelings. Longer than I realized. I think part of me has always known, but I was too scared to admit it, too worried about what it would mean, what people would think. Eric pulled back to look into his eyes. And now? Now I don't care what anyone else thinks. I only care about this, about us, about not wasting any more time pretending I don't want you. The confession sent heat spiraling through Eric's body, and he captured Ronald's mouth in another kiss, pouring all of his love and longing and relief into the connection between them. They moved together toward the couch, never breaking contact, hands roaming and exploring with a reverence that spoke of how precious this moment was to both of them. When they finally settled onto the cushions, Eric curled against Ronald's side with his head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It felt like coming home, like finding the place where he belonged after years of wandering. Ronald asked softly, his fingers combing through Eric's hair. Just this, how perfect this feels. How right. It does feel right, doesn't it? Like this is how we were always supposed to be. Eric tilted his head up to look at him. Do you think we would have figured it out eventually if you hadn't brought it up that night? Ronald considered the question. I don't know, maybe. I think the feelings were getting too strong to ignore much longer. I was starting to feel like I was going crazy, wanting something I couldn't name with someone I wasn't supposed to want. I'm glad you were brave enough to name it. I'm glad you were patient enough to wait for me to figure it out. They talked late into the night, sharing fears and hopes and dreams for their future together. When Eric finally fell asleep in Ronald's arms, it was with the bone-deep satisfaction of a man who had finally found his home. The next few months passed in a blur of discovery and joy. They navigated the transition from friends to lovers with surprising grace, finding that their foundation of genuine friendship made everything else easier. They learned each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had always paid to each other's minds and hearts. There were challenges, of course. Ronald struggled with coming out to his family, worried about their reaction to his relationship with Eric. His parents were traditional, conservative people who had always assumed he would settle down with a nice woman and give them grandchildren. The prospect of disappointing them weighed heavily on his mind. He asked Eric one evening as they lay in bed together, his voice small and uncertain in the darkness. Quote 111, Eric replied, pressing a kiss to Ronald's temple. But I think you might be underestimating them. People can surprise you sometimes. What if they don't? What if they cut me out of their lives? Eric felt Ronald's body tense with anxiety, and he tightened his arms around him. Quote woman. Ronald turned in his arms, seeking his mouth in the darkness. Quote woman, he whispered against Eric's lips. I love you too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. When Ronald finally did come out to his parents, their reaction was better than he had feared, but not as easy as he had hoped. There were tears and confusion, long conversations about what this meant and whether he was sure about his feelings. But ultimately, their love for their son won out over their preconceptions, and they welcomed Eric into the family with genuine warmth. I still don't completely understand it, Ronald's mother admitted to Eric at a family dinner a few months later. Eric had felt tears prick at his eyes at her acceptance, at the way she had made an effort to include him in family traditions and conversations. It meant more than he could express to be welcomed not just as Ronald's boyfriend, but as a member of their family. At work, they were more cautious about their relationship, unsure of how their colleagues would react. But gradually they began to be more open, attending company events together and allowing their coworkers to draw their own conclusions. Most people were supportive, and those who weren't kept their opinions to themselves. Eric found that he didn't care as much about other people's reactions as he had expected to. Being with Ronald had given him a confidence he had never possessed before, a certainty about who he was and what he wanted that made other people's approval seem less important. I never understood why people talked about love changing them, he told Ronald one evening as they cooked dinner together in their shared apartment. I always thought it was just romantic nonsense, but I feel like a completely different person than I was before we got together. Different how? Ronald asked. wrapping his arms around Eric's waist from behind and nuzzling his neck. Stewantwin, quoted Wham. Eric leaned back against him, savoring the warmth and solid presence of the man he loved. Quote to Postemo, quote, soon Ronald admitted. Quote Uenon, quote Gwanin, Eric agreed. Quote Uferdin, quote Advertinon, quote Ornon. Ronald pressed a kiss to the side of his neck. Quote Worson, quote Weirden, quote Curzon. Eric turned in his arms, reaching up to frame Ronald's face with his hands. I love your honesty, the way you're not afraid to be vulnerable with me, to let me see all of you. I love your kindness, the way you make me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. They could have continued the litany of love for hours, cataloging all the ways they had learned to appreciate each other. Instead, Eric pulled Ronald down for a kiss, pouring all of his gratitude and affection into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronald rested his forehead against Eric's. Quote, Damo, 138, quote, 139, Eric corrected. Quote, 140, quote, 141. Ronald murmured, capturing Eric's lips in another kiss. As the months turned into years, their relationship deepened and strengthened. They weathered the normal challenges that all couples face, learning to communicate through disagreements and support each other through difficult times. But the foundation of friendship and genuine affection they had built made everything easier. They moved in together officially after dating for 8 months, combining their belongings and their lives with the easy familiarity of people who had known each other for years. Eric's books found homes next to Ronald's vinyl records, and their mismatched furniture somehow created a space that felt perfectly like home. I can't believe we used to live apart, Eric said one morning as he watched Ronald make coffee in their shared kitchen, his hair still messy from sleep and his movements graceful and familiar. I know. It seems ridiculous now, doesn't it? All those years of hanging out at each other's apartments when we could have just been living together? Well, we weren't ready then. We needed time to figure out who we were separately before we could become who we are together. Ronald handed him a cup of coffee, prepared exactly the way Eric liked it without having to ask. When did you become so wise about relationships? Probably around the time I fell in love with my best friend and had to learn patience, Eric said with a grin. Your best friend is a very lucky man. I think so too. They settled onto the couch together, Eric curling up against Ronald's side in the position that had become second nature to them. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside their small apartment, everything was perfect and peaceful and exactly as it should be. Ronald asked, his fingers combing absently through Eric's hair. This, Eric replied without hesitation. Just this. Just sitting here? Just being with you. It doesn't matter what we do as long as we're together. Ronald's arms tightened around him. Quote, worm, quote, man, quote, your son. Ronald laughed, the sound warm and content in the quiet morning air. Quote, and quote, they had been together for 2 years when Ronald proposed, on a quiet Tuesday evening that felt remarkably similar to the night when everything had changed between them. They were sitting at the same kitchen table where they had first confessed their feelings, sharing takeout Chinese food and talking about their days. Quote 160, Ronald said suddenly, his voice nervous in a way that made Eric look up from his lo mein with curiosity. Quote 161, Eric said with a smile. Quote 162. Eric felt his heart skip a beat at the unexpected romance in Ronald's voice. What's going on? Instead of answering him, Ronald reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the table between them with trembling hands. Eric's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the box, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. Ronald said quickly, his words tumbling over each other in his nervousness. Eric felt tears prick at his eyes as Ronald opened the box to reveal 2 simple gold bands, elegant and understated and perfect. Quote to Wax 7. Ronald continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Eric was crying now, tears streaming down his cheeks as he listened to the man he loved pour his heart out across their small kitchen table. Quote, Ronald said, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Quote, Eric's answer was to launch himself across the table into Ronald's arms, knocking over his water glass and sending chopsticks clattering to the floor. Quote 171. He sobbed against Ronald's neck. Yes, of course, yes. Ronald held him tight, both of them crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment and the promise it held for their future. I love you, Ronald whispered into Eric's hair. Toi and far, Eric replied, pulling back to look into his eyes. Quote 176 to quote 177 on. Ronald said, echoing his words from that first night when everything had changed between them. Quote 178. Eric laughed through his tears. Quote one and by quote one. Ronald confirmed, slipping one of the rings onto Eric's finger with reverent care. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for Eric's hand. He admired it for a moment before taking the second ring and sliding it onto Ronald's finger, marveling at how right it looked there. How long have you been planning this? Eric asked. Months, Ronald admitted with a sheepish smile. I've been carrying that ring around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But then I realized that every moment with you is the right moment. Eric cupped Ronald's face in his hands, studying the features he had memorized long ago, the eyes that had become his home, the mouth that had taught him what love really felt like. Quote Ronald replied, leaning in for a kiss that tasted like forever and promises in the beginning of the rest of their lives. They celebrated that night by ordering champagne and slow dancing in their living room to music only they could hear. Eric had never felt so happy, so complete, so certain that he was exactly where he belonged. Ronald asked as they swayed together in the dim light of their apartment. Eric said simply. Ronald's forearms tightened around him. I'm never going to stop trying to deserve that kind of love. You already deserve it. You've always deserved it. You just needed to believe it yourself. They planned their wedding for the following spring, a small ceremony in Ronald's parents' backyard with just their closest friends and family in attendance. It wasn't legally recognized, but it felt more real and meaningful than any piece of paper could have made it. Eric cried when he saw Ronald waiting for him at the makeshift altar, handsome in his navy suit and looking at Eric like he was the most precious thing in the world. Ronald cried when Eric began reciting the vows they had written together, promises to love and support and choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. Eric said, his voice thick with emotion. Ronald replied, tears streaming down his cheeks. When they kissed as newly married partners, Eric felt like his heart might burst with happiness. This was everything he had dreamed of, and more than he had ever dared to hope for. The reception was simple but perfect, filled with laughter and dancing and the warm glow of being surrounded by people who loved and supported them. Eric's parents, who had welcomed Ronald into the family with open arms from the beginning, gave a toast about love being love, regardless of gender. Ronald's father, who had struggled initially with his son's sexuality, spoke about learning that happiness was more important than expectations. I didn't understand at first, he said, raising his glass to the couple. But watching my son with Eric, seeing how happy they are together, taught me that love is something to be celebrated, not questioned. I'm proud of them both for having the courage to follow their hearts. Eric felt Ronald's hand squeeze his under the table, and when he looked over, his husband's eyes were bright with tears of gratitude and relief. As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, Eric and Ronald found themselves alone on the dance floor, swaying together under the string lights that Ronald's mother had hung throughout the backyard. Quotemon and Eric asked, admiring the way the light caught on their matching wedding bands. Ronald replied. Tuano and Tuano. Ronald shook his head. Eric smiled, pulling Ronald closer. Eric agreed, standing on his toes to press a soft kiss to Ronald's lips. I love you, husband, Ronald murmured against his mouth. I love you too, husband. 5 years later, they were hosting their own backyard barbecue, their home filled with the laughter of friends and the chaos of children belonging to their married friends. Eric was manning the grill while Ronald played host, making sure everyone had drinks and that the various dietary restrictions were being accommodated. You two make it look so easy, their friend Carol Foster commented, watching Eric flip burgers while simultaneously keeping an eye on Ronald as he chased their friend's toddler around the yard. Hotel 112. Eric asked, not taking his eyes off his husband, who was now being climbed on by 3 different children like a human jungle gym. I'd a two for Eric laughed. Eric considered this, watching as Ronald caught his eye across the yard and smiled, the same smile that had been making Eric's heart skip beats for almost 8 years now. I think we just fit, he said finally. We always did, even before we understood what that meant. We just had to grow into ourselves enough to recognize it. That's beautiful, Carol said with a sigh. I hope I find something like that someday. You will, Eric assured her. Sometimes it just takes time to find the right person, or to become the right person for someone else. Later that evening, after their guests had gone home and they had finished cleaning up, Eric and Ronald collapsed onto their couch with glasses of wine and the satisfied exhaustion that came from a successful party. That was fun, Ronald said, curling up against Eric's side in the position that had become as natural as breathing over the years. Kadtana saw it at time, and Ronald agreed, pressing a kiss to Eric's shoulder. Just us. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling into evening. Eric found himself thinking about their journey, about how far they had come from that confused, uncertain night in Ronald's kitchen when everything had changed between them. Book 226, he asked quietly. Quote, ta someone, quoted Danton. Ronald was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Quote, 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 Eric tilted his head to look at his husband, taking in the familiar features that had become more precious to him with each passing year. Quoted Ryan, Ronald shifted to look at him more fully. Quoted Eric smiled. Quoted on, Ronald leaned in to kiss him, soft and sweet, and full of the kind of love that had grown deeper and stronger with time, rather than fading. Quote 239, quote on, quote Tanya, quote Arihishi. They could have continued trading declarations of love, as they often did during these quiet moments together. Instead, Eric pulled Ronald down for another kiss, deeper this time, full of 8 years of shared history and the promise of decades more to come. Quote 243. Ronald asked when they broke apart. Quote 44. Eric replied without hesitation. Ronald's smile was bright and warm and full of the same contentment that Eric felt settling in his own chest. I can't believe I almost missed this. I can't believe I almost let fear keep me from the best thing that ever happened to me. But you didn't miss it. You found your courage when it mattered most. We found our courage, Ronald corrected. We did this together. Together, Eric agreed, settling more comfortably against his husband's side. Chapter 53, quote 254. As the evening deepened around them, Eric found himself thinking about that night months ago when Ronald had been standing by the window, when Eric had been frozen on the couch with his jacket in his lap, both of them terrified and hopeful and on the verge of everything changing. He thought about how far they had come since then, how much they had built together, how solid and real and permanent their love had become. Quote 255, he said softly. Quote 256. Quote 257. Ronald's arms tightened around him. Best decision I ever made. Even though you were terrified, especially because I was terrified. The best things in life are usually the scariest ones to reach for. Eric smiled, pressing a kiss to Ronald's chest, where his heart beat steady and strong beneath his ear. Outside, the world continued its relentless motion, full of uncertainty and change and all the complications that life could bring. But inside their small home, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the life they had built together, everything was perfect and peaceful and exactly as it should be. Eric thought about that jacket sometimes, the one he had been holding that night when everything changed between them. It was hanging in their shared closet now, just another piece of clothing among all their combined belongings. But to Eric, it would always represent the moment when he chose to stay instead of leaving, when he chose love instead of fear, when he chose to trust in the possibility of something beautiful even when he couldn't see how it would work out. Quote 265, Ronald asked, noticing the expression on Eric's face. Just thinking about that jacket. What jacket? The one I was supposed to pick up that night, the one I was holding when you asked me to stay. Ronald's expression softened with understanding. Quote 269. Quote 27, Eric admitted. Quote 271, quote 267. Eric considered the question, thinking back to that pivotal moment when everything hung in the balance. Quote 27, quote Ronald, pressed a kiss to the top of his head. Quote, Twakata, quote, 7, quote, to how as Ronald promised. Quote, diet, quote, bonds that Eric repeated, marveling at how those words no longer felt overwhelming or impossible. They felt like a promise, like a gift, like the most natural thing in the world. As they settled into sleep that night, Eric found himself thinking about all the people who might be sitting on their own couches right now, holding their own metaphorical jackets and trying to decide whether to stay or go. He hoped they would find the courage to stay. He hoped they would discover, as he had, that the most beautiful love stories often begin with a simple decision to remain in a moment that feels too big and too scary and too important to fully understand. Because sometimes the best things in life come to those who are brave enough to sit with their uncertainty, to hold their fear alongside their hope, and to trust that love will find a way to make everything work out exactly as it should. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with something as simple as setting down your jacket and choosing to stay. Years passed in a blur of ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were shared. Eric and Ronald celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered job changes and family losses, supported each other through challenges, and celebrated each other's victories. Their love deepened and matured, becoming less urgent but more steady, less desperate but more certain. They adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Charlie, who became the third member of their family and somehow made their small apartment feel even more like home. They talked about buying a house, about traveling the world, about all the dreams they wanted to pursue together. Do you think we'll always be this happy? Eric asked one morning as they lay in bed, Charlie sprawled across their feet, and sunlight streaming through the windows. I think we'll have our ups and downs like any couple, Ronald replied thoughtfully. But I think what we have is strong enough to weather whatever comes our way. Even if we get old and cranky and forget to appreciate each other. Ronald laughed. Especially then. I plan to be the most devoted cranky old man you've ever seen. I can't wait to grow old with you, Eric said, meaning every word. Even when I lose all my hair and need reading glasses to see anything? Especially then. You'll be distinguished and scholarly, very attractive. And when you start forgetting where you put your keys and telling the same stories over and over, I'll help you find your keys and I'll listen to your stories like it's the first time I'm hearing them because they'll be our stories and they'll still be precious to me. Ronald turned to face him fully, his expression serious despite the lightness of their conversation. Do you really mean that? Every word. I want all of it with you, Ronald. The good times and the hard times, the exciting adventures and the boring everyday moments. I want to build a whole life with you. We're already building it, Ronald pointed out. Every day, every choice we make together, every small moment we share, it's all part of the life we're creating. Eric smiled, reaching over to trace the familiar lines of Ronald's face. Quote 295, quote 296. They were interrupted by Charlie, who had apparently decided that they had been lying still for too long and needed to be reminded that it was time for his morning walk. His enthusiastic face-licking campaign was impossible to ignore, and soon they were laughing and trying to fend off his affectionate assault. Kotar to 297, Eric said, scratching behind Charlie's ears. Someone's very demanding this morning. He gets that from you, Ronald said with a grin, earning him a playful swat from Eric. I am not demanding. I'm enthusiastic about life. Same thing. They went through their morning routine with the easy synchronization of people who had been sharing space for years. Ronald made coffee while Eric took Charlie out for his walk. Eric started breakfast while Ronald showered. They moved around each other in their small kitchen like dancers who had been rehearsing the same choreography for years. What do you want to do today? Ronald asked as they sat down to eat. I don't care, as long as we do it together. We could go to the farmer's market, or take Charlie to the dog park, or just stay home and be lazy. All of those sound perfect. Ronald smiled. You're easy to please. I'm happy, Eric corrected. There's a difference. What's the difference? Eric considered the question as he sipped his coffee. Easy to please suggests that I don't have strong preferences, that anything will do, but I'm not settling for anything. I'm genuinely happy with whatever we choose to do because I get to do it with you. You make everything better just by being there. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said. I have my moments. Yes, you do, and I love every single one of them. They decided on the farmer's market, spending the morning wandering between stalls of fresh produce and handmade crafts, Charlie trotting happily between them and charming everyone they met with his friendly demeanor. It was the kind of simple, ordinary day that Eric had come to treasure, full of small pleasures and quiet contentment. Look at that, Ronald said, pointing to an elderly couple walking hand in hand ahead of them. The man was leaning heavily on a cane, and his wife was matching his slow pace with patient grace. That's going to be us someday. Growing old together? Still holding hands. Still choosing to walk at the same pace even when it's not convenient. Eric felt his chest tighten with emotion at the image. I hope so. I hope we're still that in love when we're their age. We will be. What we have doesn't fade, Eric. It just gets deeper and stronger with time. How can you be so sure? Ronald stopped walking and turned to face him, his expression serious and full of certainty. Because I know us. I know how we take care of each other, how we choose each other every day. I know that our love isn't based on passion or excitement or any of those things that burn bright and burn out. It's based on friendship and respect and genuine affection. It's built to last. Eric felt tears prick at his eyes at the quiet conviction in Ronald's voice. Quote 322, quote 323, quote 324. Ronald leaned in to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise, right there in the middle of the farmer's market with people walking around them and Charlie wagging his tail at their feet. It was the kind of public display of affection that Eric had once been too self-conscious to engage in, but now felt as natural as breathing. Quote 325. Eric asked when they broke apart. Quote 7. They continued their walk through the market, hands intertwined, talking about nothing and everything, completely comfortable in each other's presence. Eric found himself thinking about how different this felt from those early days when every interaction had been charged with uncertainty and desperate longing. This was better, he realized, this quiet certainty, this deep contentment, this absolute trust in each other and in what they had built together. What are you thinking about? Ronald asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Just how good this is. How right it feels to be here with you like this. Even without all the drama and angst of figuring it out? Eric laughed, especially without all the drama and angst. I'll take peaceful happiness over emotional turmoil any day. Even if it means fewer grand romantic gestures and more quiet moments like this. These quiet moments are the grand romantic gestures. This is what love really looks like when you strip away all the Hollywood nonsense. It looks like farmers markets and shared coffee and walking the dog together. It looks like choosing each other every day, even when it's not exciting. Ronald squeezed his hand. I love your perspective on things. I love your everything. Smooth talker. Only for you. That evening, they were back on their couch, Charlie sprawled across both their laps and a movie playing on the television that neither of them was really watching. Eric was reading while Ronald scrolled through his phone, both of them content to exist in each other's presence without the need for constant conversation or entertainment. Quote 338. Ronald said suddenly, his voice thoughtful. Quote 3 and quote Fortomandum. Eric looked up from his book. Quote fun, quote quote for Ronald set his phone aside and turned to face Eric more fully. Quote deforted, quote iron and quote Ron. Eric felt his heart swell with emotion at the words. Quote catcher, quote forted, quote she and a quote omni, quote hide, quote. Ronald reached over to cup Eric's face in his hand, his thumb brushing across his cheekbone in the gesture that had become so familiar and precious over the years. Especially then. Your caring heart is one of the things I love most about you. You worry because you love deeply, and that's a beautiful thing. Eric leaned into the touch, closing his eyes and savoring the warmth of Ronald's palm against his skin. They settled back into comfortable silence, Eric returning to his book and Ronald to his phone, but the mood had shifted subtly. There was something in the air between them, a heightened awareness that felt familiar and electric. Eric found himself reading the same paragraph over and over, too distracted by Ronald's presence beside him to focus on the words. Eric, Ronald said again, his voice softer this time. Yeah. Put the book down. Eric looked up to find Ronald watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. There was heat in his eyes, but also tenderness, the kind of look that spoke of years of shared intimacy and the promise of years more to come. Wika, Eric asked, though he was already setting the book aside. Because I want to kiss you, and I want your full attention when I do it. Eric's pulse quickened at the words, at the quiet intensity in Ronald's voice. Even after all these years, Ronald could still make him feel like a teenager with a crush, could still send electricity shooting through his veins with nothing more than a look or a touch. You have my full attention, Eric said, his voice slightly breathless. Ronald smiled, slow and warm and full of promise. Good. The kiss was soft at first, gentle and exploratory, as if they were still learning each other's mouths. But it deepened quickly. Years of familiarity and desire combining to create something that was both comfortable and exciting, both known and surprising. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronald rested his forehead against Eric's. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, Eric replied, his voice rough with emotion and want. What do you want to do now? Eric's answer was to pull Ronald closer, to capture his mouth in another kiss that spoke of everything they meant to each other and everything they still had to discover together. Because even after all these years, even after all the quiet moments and ordinary days, they could still surprise each other. They could still find new depths to explore, new ways to show their love, new reasons to be grateful for the choice they had made to stay on that couch all those years ago and see what might happen if they were brave enough to reach for something beautiful. Later, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Charlie snoring softly on his dog bed in the corner, Eric found himself thinking about time and how it had changed everything and nothing between them. The desperate urgency of their early relationship had mellowed into something deeper and more sustainable, but the core of what they felt for each other remained unchanged. Quote 369 what Ronald asked, his voice sleepy and content in the darkness. Quote 370. Quote 371. Eric shifted to rest his head more comfortably on Ronald's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I was thinking about how different this feels from those first few months when everything was so intense and uncertain, but also how the essential thing between us, the love and the connection and the way you make me feel like I'm home, that's exactly the same. Better, I think. Deeper. Definitely deeper. More rooted. Like we've grown into each other instead of just falling for each other. Ronald's arms tightened around him. Quote 375, quote 376, quote Shabbat, quote found, quote. Eric smiled in the darkness, amazed as always by how perfectly Ronald understood him, how easily they could build on each other's thoughts and feelings. We're good at this. At what? At being us, at being together, at making this work. We are. Ronald agreed with quiet satisfaction. We really are. Do you think we'll always be this good at it? I think we'll get even better. I think we'll keep learning and growing and finding new ways to love each other. Even when we're old and cranky and set in our ways? Especially then. We'll be the couple that other people look at and think, I want what they have. Eric laughed softly. Like that couple at the farmer's market today. Exactly like that couple. Still holding hands, still choosing each other, still finding joy in simple moments together. I can't wait. For what? To be old with you, to have 50 years of memories to look back on instead of just a few, to know that we made it, that we built something that lasted. Ronald pressed a kiss to the top of his head. We're already making it, Eric. Every day we wake up and choose this, choose each other. We're building that future. I know, I just love thinking about it, about all the years we still have ahead of us. Me too. I love knowing that this is just the beginning. As Eric drifted off to sleep in Ronald's arms, he thought about that jacket one more time, not with regret or nostalgia, but with gratitude for the moment it represented, for the choice he had made to set it amward and stay. Because staying had led to everything good in his life, everything beautiful and meaningful and worth celebrating. He thought about all the other people out there who might be facing their own jacket moments, their own choices between safety and possibility, between the known and the unknown. He hoped they would find the courage to stay, to take the risk, to trust in the possibility of love, even when they couldn't see how it would work out. Because love, real love, the kind that lasted and grew and sustained two people through all of life's challenges and changes, was always worth the risk. It was worth the uncertainty and the fear and the vulnerability. It was worth every moment of doubt and confusion and terror that came before the moment when everything clicked into place and you realized you were exactly where you belonged. Eric had found his home in Ronald's arms, in their shared life, in the choice they made every day to keep building something beautiful together. And as he fell asleep to the sound of his husband's breathing and the weight of Charlie's gentle snoring, he knew that he would never take any of it for granted. Some love stories began with grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but the best ones, the ones that lasted, often began with something much simpler. The decision to stay when leaving would have been easier, the choice to trust when fear would have been safer, the courage to reach for something beautiful, even when you couldn't see how it would work out. Eric's love story had begun with a jacket he never put on, a couch he couldn't bring himself to leave, and a conversation that changed everything. It had grown into a marriage built on friendship and respect and genuine affection, sustained by daily choices to see the best in each other and to keep building something beautiful together. And as he settled into sleep beside the man who had become his home, his partner, his best friend, and his greatest love, Eric knew that their story was far from over. They had years ahead of them, decades of ordinary moments and extraordinary joys, challenges to face together, and dreams to pursue side by side. But no matter what the future held, he would always be grateful for that night when he chose to stay, when he chose love over fear, when he chose to trust in the possibility of something beautiful, even when he couldn't see how it would work out, because that choice had led to everything good in his life, and he would never regret having the courage to make it. Sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as ordinary ones. Sometimes the most profound changes began with the simplest decisions. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories started with nothing more than the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier, to trust when fear would have been safer, to believe in the possibility of something wonderful even when you couldn't see how it would work out. Eric had made that choice and it had changed everything. He had found his home, his heart, his future in the arms of the man sleeping beside him. And as he drifted off to sleep, surrounded by love and contentment and the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, he knew that he would never stop being grateful for the courage to stay. The jacket hung forgotten in their closet, just another piece of clothing among all their combined belongings. But Eric would never forget what it represented. The moment when everything changed, the choice that led to everything beautiful, the decision to trust in love even when the outcome was uncertain. And in the morning, when they woke up together as they had for years and would for years to come, Eric would look at his husband and remember all over again how lucky they were to have found each other, how brave they had been to take the risk, and how perfect it felt to have built a life together based on friendship and love, and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. Because that's what real love was, not the dramatic passion of movies and novels, but the quiet certainty of knowing you had found your person, the deep contentment of building a life together, and the daily choice to keep showing up for each other no matter what challenges life might bring. Eric had found all of that and more in Ronald, and he would spend the rest of his life being grateful for the courage to stay when leaving would have been easier, to trust when fear would have been safer, to believe in the possibility of something beautiful even when he couldn't see how it would work out. Their love story would continue for decades to come, filled with ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were shared, challenges that made them stronger, and joys that were doubled because they experienced them together. They would grow old side by side, still holding hands, still choosing each other, still finding new reasons to be grateful for the choice they had made to trust in love, even when the outcome was uncertain. And someday, when they were the elderly couple walking slowly through a farmer's market, while younger couples watched them with admiration and hope, Eric would still remember that night when he sat on the couch with his jacket in his lap, paralyzed by the possibility of everything changing. He would remember the choice he made to stay, to trust, to reach for something beautiful even when he was terrified of the outcome. because that choice had led to everything good in his life. It had led to love and marriage and a partnership that sustained him through all of life's ups and downs. It had led to a home filled with laughter and contentment and the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. And he would never stop being grateful for the courage to stay.